Ross is actually on the committee.
1, 2, 3. And,
Lisa is not here,
and
and then Herman is not here.
stepping down.
We are now live.
Very good. I'd like to call to order the Rush River Municipal Advisory Council's Land Use Committee. And first item on our agenda is roll call. Staff, would you do the roll call, please?
Mike Nichols,
Present.
Joe Roga,
Here.
Patty Thayer. Here. And as this is a joint meeting with the MAC, Spencer Scott
Here.
and Cynthia Strucker. Here.
Thank you. 3 members of the 2023 Land Use Committee are required for land use quorum. Mike, Patty, and Joe are expected to attend, and we are present. The meeting is also noticed as a River MAC meeting. In the event that there are more than 5 members present, a MAC quorum is not required to continue. The next item is Pledge of Allegiance. We don't have a flag. We do have.
We do have.
We do. Great. Would you lead the pledge, please? Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for us. I did the pause. All righty.
Thank you.
Next item is public comment, and I'm not going to put a time restraint on public comment, but if there's any public comment at this point in time that is relative to our jurisdiction, it's open right now.
Oh, are you with us here?
I am.
You may come and sit up
Oh,
here at the table. Nice to meet you. Debbie.
Do we have any public comment online?
Is there any public comment from the online attendees? I see no hands raised.
Very good, thank you. How many attendees do we have?
3.
And no public comment here in the chambers, so we can move on then to the next item, which is our major land use project process and steps for public input. I'd like to introduce Scott Orr, the Assistant Director of Permit Sonoma, and he's going to review the processes and answer questions from the LUC and the MAC members present. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. And for anyone on Zoom, I don't have a screen, so I'm gonna look at this thing that I think is a camera. Yeah. Thank you all for having me. That's my first time in person at one of these, so that's exciting. So my name is Scott Orr. I'm the Assistant Director at Permit Sonoma. Prior to my current role, which I assumed last August, I was the Deputy Director of Planning for 3 years. And then before that, I was the Project Review Division Manager. So that's the manager that oversees all the land use permits, not the policy, just the permits. And then prior to that, I was a staff level planner. And so I've been with the county since 2016, seen a pretty good share of things from fence permits all the way to the local coastal plan update magnitude. So I've seen a pretty good range. So I think it would be best to kind of focus on kind of 2 separate processes.
Okay.
And maybe I'll get some direction on which one you want to hear first. So there's the land use permit process, and then there's a county-led policy process, and both are, there's a lot of overlap in when the public comment is the most effective, but, I think they're different enough that I would want to talk about them separately.
Yeah, I think as chair of the land use committee, our concern as committee members has been the fact that many times there are projects noticed that we don't have enough lead time to convene a committee meeting and solicit public comment and then pass that information along at the next scheduled MAC meeting. And in the past, the prior chair would call each of the process managers And I don't think that we don't really have the time to reach each one of these people. And it would be really helpful if on a regular basis, if hot ticket items be forwarded to the chair of the land use committee. I think that's basically all that we're asking for.
Mhm.
Is enough lead time so that we can convene a meeting, solicit public comment, and then bring it to the full MAC board. So that, yes, go ahead, Joe. Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing is that constituents are very confused about what input to provide when.
Mhm.
So they'll, at an EIR review, they'll be talking about something completely different. So they don't know, and I don't know, when the proper time is to intervene, to make comments known, to pass along information. So that's the majority of questions I get asked. When can I talk about the project in Vernon Park? When do I get input? So,
Well, we'll start with the smallest projects and then we'll kind of work up from there. So the smallest projects that we deal with, at least in terms of the level of review and regulation, I mean, even the smallest project can be really important to someone, especially if they don't agree with it. But the smallest projects are what we call ministerial projects, which means, it's things like if you're gonna build a new single-family dwelling, if you're meeting the building code and all the applicable standards, there isn't really any room for a public process in that part. Just for the sake of, governmental efficiency, that's just kind of how it's set up. And we do have some permits like that on the planning side, such as, someone might need to encroach into a riparian corridor, for a creek to, for like a corner of their septic system or their accessory dwelling unit. So they'll submit for this permit. We say, yes, you're not infringing on the biological habitat, you can do that. And then sometimes we do have ministerial permits that do have public notice. And, I think those are the ones that's more confusing because, if you see a public notice, there's an assumption, well, I may want to say something about this. So one example is a vacation rental permit. So if you meet certain standards and you're in certain areas, you can get a vacation rental permit ministerially. But there is a public noticing component to that to let neighborhoods know when a new one moves in. So, because our code enforcement is complaint-based, so, it's kind of just a mental note. Be watching those garbage cans to let Permit Sonoma know. So those are kind of on the smaller end. Kind of the next step up, which is,
Could I ask a question before you go on? So you say on some of these, there will be a public notice. How much notice is given just time-wise? And is that a notice always to come to some public hearing, or is it more written comments, or will it depend on the project?
it really depends on the project. So the notice itself will say, what the next step is. So if it is one of these ministerial projects, which, it's, if they meet all the requirements, they get their permit. And if it's just a public notice, it's basically saying, hey, neighborhood or anyone who is an interested party on this date, this permit will be issued because they've met all the requirements. There is an appeal period for things like that, but you can only appeal what is on that checklist. So if the, checklist has a certain requirement, let's say it's a biological assessment, for example. So because maybe there's an endangered species in the area. If they submit that and it, is adequate in that it, is performed by a biologist, they are making their conclusion based on facts, then they would get their permit. If you wanted to appeal that, you would have to say they didn't submit it, which is a hard thing to prove if they did. Or you would have to, say that what they did was flawed. Let's say the biological assessment was done by Joe in his spare time, and he just, submitted it and said, today I'm a biologist, then, the appeal would have merit. Ministerial appeals are very rare because they're so black and white. But we'll talk a whole lot more about appeals when we get to discretionary permits.
Right.
So discretionary permits are the ones that go through a full public process, no matter what it's for. So we have discretionary permits for fences that are 6 feet tall in the front yard, everywhere in the county. So that is the same process that a 80-foot telecommunications tower or a million case ag processing and winery with visitors serving uses. All of those go through the same process, which is someone submits to Permit Sonoma saying, this is what I'd like to do. And then staff take an initial pass at, okay, you're right, you do need these 2 permits, but you also need this one. And so we call that completeness review, where we're making sure that they have everything they need for someone to sit down and do the analysis and determine whether it complies with local zoning regulations, the general plan, and some general kind of health and safety findings that it won't be detrimental to, the environment or neighbors. So once the planner, who's doing this review says, okay, there's enough here that someone can look at this project and go, okay, I understand what I'm looking at, where it is, and that's the time where the planner will send it out on what we call a referral, which is other county departments and agencies, bodies like this one. We have contact information for all the various MACs and CACs and a lot of the, some nonprofits, things like the Milo Baker group. And so we send that out, the project materials out to everyone.
However, we have not received that information.
Well, sometimes it depends. Sometimes you do need a project to be within your area, but if you haven't received it, I think we'll want to make sure that someone is checking the email that we're sending things to. So,
I'll make a note
okay.
to confirm what.
Yeah, because I
email
did
sent
check
out.
that before I left the office today, because there was a time where, let's say there was someone named Jenny who gets all of the projects
Exactly.
on behalf of your group, and then they say, you know what, I'm gonna move to Maine. But we're still emailing
Jenny.
Jenny. So what we've done is we've shifted to, we need a static shared email
Generic,
address.
generic,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So that does exist for this group, so we'll want to make sure that it's going to somebody.
Okay,
Or more important, that it's going to somebody that someone's looking at it. So during that first round, the planner is operating under something called the Permit Streamlining Act. Basically, a long time ago, the government would get your planning permit and then they'd throw it, in a pile of other permits and say, we'll get to it at some point. Well, so the Permit Streamlining Act says from submittal, the planner has 30 days to let the applicant know if they have everything they need to finish the process. And if we miss that, then we can't hold that against them. Anything that's missing, we can't base in our decision. So that's why it's so important that we, get the project out as soon as possible to get comments from like our fire prevention or public infrastructure departments, because they're not in the same building as Permit Sonoma. So it's hard for us to, we can't just walk over and put it down and say, what do you think? We need to give a little bit of time for those specialists to, make time to review it in a level of detail where they can provide comments. One thing that does trip people up a lot is they'll see this referral that says, hey, other agencies, you've got 2 weeks to respond on this project and let us know what you need to be able to do your analysis. And so very often we'll get, people are very busy and they'll just, kind of skim through a page and go, oh my God, I only have until this day, 10 days from now to give comments. And I want to be clear that that is only for government agencies. Members of the public, that deadline does not apply to you. From the day someone submits a permit until the day one of our planning commissioners vote on it, we can be accepting comments, for example. And so going back to that first 30 days, so once the planner says, okay, we have everything we need, now we're gonna do a detailed analysis of whether you are complying with all the local regulations. And if you are complying with the California Environmental Quality Act. And so that is the longest period of time in any permit, because it's really just someone needing to sit down, look at the materials, write up their analysis, write up their findings, very likely do at least one site visit, you know, to get the lay of the land, not just, you know, using Google Maps and calling it a day. And what's so challenging about that period is it's the time that requires the most focus for staff to really be paying attention to the materials. But it's also the quietest from outside view, because, you know, as someone is, you know, writing up their report, you know, as a member of the public, you can't see, oh, you know, the planner is 30% done with their report, or they're 9 pages into their report, because it's not complete yet. So I think that's probably one of the biggest opportunities for trying to find a way to kind of share what is happening when you don't have the full picture yet. So when the planner finishes their analysis, and most of the time, the analysis concludes that, okay, this project meets all the requirements, because if it gets to that point, there's been multiple checks to where we could have encouraged them to withdraw. Like if someone comes and wants to get a permit for something and we're like, you can't have your swine farm in this like high density residential zone. Like that's a pretty easy thing to say, like, don't even try to submit. There's no way it's gonna happen. Please save your money. So that's the first filter. And then sometimes people find out, you know, oh, this is what I want to do is actually a really big, long process. It needs the board of supervisors to approve it, and it's going to take 2 years. I want to retire in a year. I'm not interested. That's kind of another filter. So things that get all the way to that point of decision, you know, have had a pretty good amount of vetting. And so usually, you know, they are in compliance with our local rules. And then also through the process, you know, the planner will be like, so you're not totally there, but if you change your project in this way, you know, instead of, you know, 10 barrels, you have 5 barrels of this, that, or the other, then you'd meet the requirements. So, you know, there's some give and take in trying to, you know, reduce the scale of projects to make them more compatible. And I realize this is a lot, and I'm happy to go back to anything. So when the planner gets to that point of decision, you know, we look at, okay, who's the decision maker in this case? If it's something like, yeah, and I also realize that while I may know what our, you know, 30 different permit types are by heart, that's just because it's my life. So feel free to ask any questions. If something is administrative design review compared to design review with hearing, administrative design review is things like a single family dwelling in a scenic corridor. Whereas design review with hearing is more likely a commercial or industrial use that we're going to have a public hearing for. So since we're talking about discretionary permits now, that means there's going to be some kind of continued public process. So we've been accepting public comment all this time. Usually there's a burst of comment at the start and a burst of comment at the end, because the middle part is quiet. You know, we're doing our analysis. So once we're towards the end, that's when we start looking at, okay, it's what decision-making body is this going to go to? Is it going to go to the Board of Zoning Adjustments? Is it going to go to the Planning Commission? Trick question, they're kind of the same thing. Sometimes Commissioner Konochover and Commissioner Marquez are wearing one hat. Sometimes they're wearing the other hat. The only rule is they both can't be wearing the same hat at the same time. So for that, we do public notice, and the length of the public notice is dictated by what level of environmental review there is. So we're not going to talk about EIRs yet. We're going to talk about the two more common things. If something is categorically exempt from CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, there's certain exemptions, such as relating to a single-family dwelling, or it's a minor expansion of an existing facility. There's even one called the common sense exemption, which used to be called the general rule exemption, but they wanted it to kind of make it easier to understand. It's like, I don't know what general rule means, but I know what common sense means. So if, a sign is changing from one name to another, common sense will tell you that's probably not having an environmental impact under CEQA. So there isn't any kind of extra noticing required if it's exempt from CEQA. If CEQA does apply, then we're looking at sometimes a 20, but usually a 30-day advance notice of the soonest date the decision could possibly be made. So our best practice is 45 days before we expect to go to a public hearing. We'll post that notice so that 30 days goes by. And then there's a couple weeks for staff to, if people do respond in time, there's a couple weeks for staff to look into, the validity of the comments, if they're bad, or if they're, positive, usually there isn't more work out of a positive. So just to build in that little bit of extra buffer time, but the state law is 30 days. So at that point, we go to public hearing, which is, in person right now, it's at the Board of Supervisors chambers. And either the Board of Zoning Adjustments or the Planning Commission, which is 5 independently appointed board members, 1 for each district. They hear a project based on the merits. So let's say it is a use permit for a fence. Those typically aren't the most well attended, but they go through the same process where an item is introduced, a presentation will be given on, this is what's proposed, this is why it meets the requirements, these are the conditions of approval. Pretty much anything that's going to go to public hearing has conditions of approval. Things that don't live in our code, but we need to make sure happen because they need to happen that way in order for us to still say, okay, this is something we can approve. So a lot of times, there can be as many as 100 different conditions of approval, which to some just seems, like too much. But we often find that there's things that we miss if we don't include them in conditions of approval. And a lot of the time, the public comment that we've got directly informs, kind of the thought process behind some of the conditions. Maybe they were originally proposing, to be open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. But based on, kind of that public process, the condition of approval say you can open at 8 and you have to close by 7. And so that's also an easier way for, 10 years down the road where, most of us aren't, still paying attention to that permit. Whoever is working, at the county at the time, if there's any problems, can go back to that permit and say, you were approved to open at this time, close at this time. So any questions up until the point of decision? Otherwise, I'm just gonna keep
It's a
going.
very complicated subject as well, or, okay, Patty, you go
Yeah.
first.
Just a couple of, you noted that you accept public comment throughout the period of the sort of internal detailed analysis. You don't have this 30 days applies to public comment. But what do you do to let the public know that there is an application that you're working on? And how long usually is this period of detailed analysis? Are we talking about, can it be weeks, months, years? Does it vary completely depending on the project? So those are my 2 questions.
To answer the second question first, yes, it can completely vary. So when we get a large project, we try to get the pulse of a neighborhood early on. So we call it early neighborhood notification. So we do the same process that we do at the end of the process when we're, getting ready for a decision, but we try to let people know really early on what it is, because having a good sense of how a neighborhood feels about something, will tell you a lot about, kind of the rest of the path for the project. Particularly if it's a project of, it's of significant size and, let's say, I'll use an example, in the Two Rock area. So the Two Rock area is in a part of the county that, for most of recent times hasn't required a groundwater study or a hydrogeologic study, because it's in an area that's supposed to have good water. But, I, remember having projects myself where, I did early notification and I started getting all these public comments, my well goes dry, my well goes dry. And so being alerted to that early on, I made the decision, applicant, you need to do a hydrogeologic study because you are using a significant amount of water. Even though it's not in an area that typically requires it, there's enough comment that's really saying this needs to be looked at. And if we didn't do that, then, we go through the process, and then we, bring it to the Board of Zoning Adjustments or Planning Commission. And one of the commissioners is gonna go, the neighbors have been telling you for 2 years that their wells go dry on every side of this property. Why didn't you make them do a study? We don't have all the information. So then, I would have to go, sorry, Commissioner Koenigshofer, you're totally right. So then we have.
Normally is.
Debatable. So then the item goes away. Staff has to say, okay, applicant, you now need to do the study, and all of a sudden you're looking at additional 18 months because, maybe this has to happen in the summer and it's October now.
Right.
So that's why we try to get as much information as early as possible, so we can say, this is everything you're gonna need. There's always one-off stuff that pops up, but we try to do everything we can to avoid that. So the early neighborhood notification, it's, so the minimum that we do is so from the property, 300 feet every direction. If they're larger parcels, like, agricultural parcels, we'll do 1,000 feet. If you get more than that, you start capturing people who may be on the other side of a ridge, and they're really just not, kind of the same community. There's no connectivity. So just because it's bigger doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be better. So we do mailers. That's also when we let the supervisors' offices know of projects that are coming forward. The district offices are helpful in kind of getting the information out, but the decision makers also need to kind of step back and not get involved too early. Otherwise, they may have to recuse themselves due to bias. So, so I mentioned the mailing and the physical notices, on the property and then kind of up the street and down the street. That's the minimum. And so usually what happens is someone will get something in the mail and go, I don't know necessarily that I'm for or against this, but I'm interested because this is where I live. I want to know, I want to keep tabs on this. So usually someone will reach out to the contact information on that notice and say, I want to stay involved. And so we will go into our computer system for the permit and make sure that, their email address and contact information is there. So that anytime we send something new out, we make sure that it goes to them as well. And, everybody has a different sense of what communication form works best for them. Some people it is the mail, some people it is email. Those are the two most common that we do, just because we're sending documents. And it's hard to send documents over the phone, but I'm sure we could fax it if anyone would like. That's what I like. So does that get to the question?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that some of the permits and the complaints that we're getting from rural residents is their ministerial applications or ministerial in nature. For example, bike, not races, we call them bicycle, marathons or what have you, microthons. Many times the applications are made, say, in April for an event in November. And we're notified a week before the event by your department. I get an email saying, oh, this is coming up in a week, you have 4 days for public comment. Well, it's impossible to go out to the ranchers and the folks in the rural communities that are affected by this to obtain their public comment. And my concern is the fact that the application was made in April and we're just notified a week before the event. Can we be notified earlier?
I think you probably can. You know, the hard part is, you know, if it is truly a ministerial permit, although you can comment, we can't force them to change things if they don't want to. So it's that balancing act of, you know, greater information for everybody, but sometimes that also leads to greater frustration.
What was really frustrating a year ago, or 2 years ago, was the fact that we had a major bike event that went from Mirabelle Road along River Road, and it was the same weekend as the Russian River Rodeo. And I called that out. People didn't realize that these two events were happening the same weekend. We had a mess out there. And had we been able to notify Permit Sonoma well in advance, because they had the application months before, it would have at least could have been discussed.
So one thing that I am really striving to make progress on in this next year, so in case anyone is not aware, so last year, the Board of Supervisors approved basically a report that directed Permit Sonoma to make a whole bunch of processing permits. And so one of the things that I'm really striving for as part of that process is I really want to make it so that it's easy for anyone to see any permits that are kind of moving, either moving through the process or have been submitted or have been approved within a certain area, just to make it as easy and transparent as possible. So if you are particularly interested in something that, you know, kind of cuts through like a geographic area, maybe not even necessarily like one piece of property, but just, you know, maybe it's the boundaries of, you know, the MAC, for example, where you're interested.
That's our jurisdiction. So.
Yeah. So, you know, I really want to get to a point where it is actually easy to, you know, go online and take a look at, you know, kind of what is moving through the system for that awareness. Not to say that there's always, going to be a forum for public input on every single one of those permits, but knowing what's going on, I think is a big part of it, because that does allow you, if there is an event, maybe we aren't able to, kind of correct the route this year, but we know they're going to come back next year. And, for a lot of these organizations that keep coming back, it's really in their best interest not to make enemies of the communities that they rely on for their event. So, it's, we're not there yet, but that's the direction that I'm trying to take us.
Mike, could I?
Yes,
make a
go ahead.
comment on that? Thank you for you said normally, right?
Most of the time, 99% of the
Yeah.
time.
It doesn't require debate, it's just like not claiming it, but oftentimes it isn't a question of right or wrong, it's a question of perspective related to community interest, little details that might emerge in a community that I might have more sensitivity to than what would normally be understood by a busy staff person that maybe is relatively new to the area or something. But one of the things, to Scott's point of getting more of this stuff online so you can find it. I'd look at it slightly different, not whether I'm right or wrong, but the MAC is a unique component of the governmental construct as it exists here. And I don't think the MAC should have to have somebody like weekly or twice a week searching the website to see if there's anything of interest.
Correct.
I think what you guys would like is to identify certain application types or topical, subjects that would automatically trigger notification of the MAC earlier about what something that's on the horizon. And it's, as much benefit as there is from having more stuff online. That also, it's good they're doing it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's that much more accessible for the average busy person in a community.
Yeah, I don't think this particular committee is interested in a 6-foot fence violation, for example, or application for a
You'd be
fence.
surprised.
Well, yeah, it could be, but I'm thinking more in terms of hot ticket items that impact the community, that the community is really concerned about, whether it be the hotel or whether it be the conversion of the gas station down on 160, where they want to put apartments in.
From, when you look at those, Scott started from one end of the continuum of permit stuff.
Right.
If you kind of jump over and look at it from the other end, absolutely, there's a major public process and major policy involved with somebody, some individual or some interest applies to amend the general plan. That's gonna have a whole bunch of process.
Right.
So but you wanna be earlier in the process than finding out
Exactly.
when it's going to hear. The other stuff, and Scott was doing a great job explaining how it all lays out in the zoning ordinance. So the general plan is the foundation. Zoning ordinance implements the general plan. Zoning, there's stuff that's permitted under a particular zoning category. There's stuff that's totally off the wall, like a hog farm in a high density residential zone. But then there's a category of stuff that might be okay, instead of being in the category of automatically okay. That requires a use permit. So that stuff, and the 100 conditions or whatever, the use permit I see as a tool that gives more flexibility to the zoning ordinance. And in giving it more flexibility, it defines where you draw the line about what you can and can't do. And it's an area that's not as rigid as this is permitted, and if you're not here, you don't get to do it. But if you're gonna, the use permit function provides a higher degree of scrutiny and community input to fashion it. So instead of just saying, no, you can't do that, you might be able to do it if we can find conditions that mitigate negative impacts so that you can have that activity in the zoning category. If absent the use permit tool, you either really tightly restrict or you move the line way over to being more permissive on things that might be more controversial and harder to fit in. So, when Scott talks about the time involved and stuff for staff people, to bring something to the point where it's ripe for presentation to the public and or the zoning adjustments about, here's a discretionary permit application. The staff has thoroughly vetted it. And that, that often will mean community input as well. The staff then is bringing it forward to the recommendation to approve with these conditions, which mitigate it to where it's not a problem. Now, there can be debate over the conditions and whether or not they achieve the goal, and the hotel project is a good example of that. So, that's where the rubber meets the road, and people's interest is piqued because it's not 4 years before something's gonna be decided. But here it is. You know, to me, I think that's those like the general plan amendment, the zoning category change, the use permit, an event. Those are the big ticket items.
Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of what you guys want
Absolutely.
earlier involvement.
Yeah.
And I would say too, before I let Scott proceed. When the MAC sends information to the planning commission or to the board of zoning adjustments, it's much more useful if that information has come after the MAC has gotten information about staff analysis, not just applicant advocacy. Because, you know, it's impossible to imagine how, you know, the Board of Zoning Adjustment can't function without getting the staff report.
Right.
So for the most meaning to come out of the MAC to advise the staff and the planning commission or the Board of Zoning Adjustments, the more informed you all are at the point in time you might make a recommendation, the better, because it makes the recommendation more meaningful. And if that isn't achievable entirely, because it's like when they get the staff report done, it's not that far ahead of when it's coming to hearing. So that's, you know, that's, I think, an insurmountable squeeze point there. So absent of that, what I think is really helpful earlier that the MAC can provide is highlighting issues. The community is concerned about this and this and this and this, to make sure that that sensitivity to community interest and perception of the proposal is factored in early in the analysis as possible. I'll leave that.
So
Thanks.
staff can consider it in their recommendation.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And-
and all of those are great points, and you know, as an example, let's say there's a project and, you know, it's maybe on the corner of a, you know, not even a two-way stop, no-way stop, you know, it's just, you know, kind of the honor system, you know, people slow roll and hope for the best, but that's where the project is, because that's where this person owns land, you know, they don't own land over by 101, it's here. But the community is concerned about the safety of this new use. Let's say it's a restaurant and there's traffic concerns, safety concerns. You know, that's the opportunity where if we get feedback like that, you know, we can work with the applicant who wants community support. No one in the world is gonna say, I don't want community support. You know, it's like, you know, from a utilitarian perspective, it's kind of a calculus, like how much can I afford? So a stoplight, you know, multi-million-dollar thing, maybe that, you know, can't really happen, but maybe a four-way stop or something, you know, it's kind of an incremental improvement that makes it so, you know, this new use, which will be generating traffic, is having a positive benefit, you know, from a safety perspective. And to the point about the general plan, you know, I think one of the most important things to think about is, you know, whether it's a job or a sport or just some other form of being, there's rules that you play by. And so for planners, they're really looking at land use and land use impacts and consistency with the zoning code and the general plan. So to update the general plan, which is basically the constitution for planners, you know, this is the vision of the community, the overarching goals that really dictates everything we do. If someone comes forward and says, I want you guys to change your constitution so that my project can happen, our default answer is no. But if they come forward with a public benefit, like let's say it's a big property and they're going to be reserving 99% of it for you know, California tiger salamander mitigation bank or something like that, then we can at least entertain it because the public is getting something that is, you know, proportionate and greater than what this change would negatively do. But you know, one comment we hear a lot, especially from applicants, is, well, just think of the tax revenue. It's like, there's people who care about it. I don't care one bit about tax revenue from an environmental impact standpoint when I'm reviewing something. So that's when I'm wearing my planner hat. So,
The standard book is always taxes and jobs.
yes.
So approved by Hog Farm next to the apartment building.
Right, so there's gonna be people that all they care about is taxes and jobs and yay, hog farm. But when the planners are doing their work, the only thing that they are looking at is the physical impacts of that project and whether it's consistent with the things that the community said is important, which is what is in the general plan.
Yep.
So, and that's a, it's an easy thing to forget when you're not kind of in it all the time, but it's just like, a sport. There's some things that, are subject to replay review and there's some things that aren't. And sometimes we need to change the rules if the rules that currently exist for, what we're doing in terms of our analysis just doesn't really align with, kind of what the community wants anymore. One really good example of that that's really changed in the last few years is our view on subdivisions. And not like 2,500 units, in,
Solano County.
for example. But to us, a subdivision is as little as taking one property, cutting it in half and having two properties. Because some people call it a lot split. And, things changed in 2017 in terms of, what we really think about in terms of land use and potential impacts. And so even though if you just read the Subdivision Map Act and you read the zoning code and you go, oh, I could, subdivide, 40 acres up that way, fully forested, no road to it, no water. We're at the point where, that is not going to get a recommendation of approval for us. It's what's your access, what's your water supply, and sorry, been talking a lot today.
Yeah.
Not only the water coming in, but where's the stuff going out when you're done with it? And what is the fire hazard severity zone? So we are really looking at those three things, which is really hard to explain to people who, I've owned this property for, it's been my family 100 years and I want to subdivide it, because all the family wants their own piece. And we're just not at a point where we can do that anymore because it's, having, an adverse impact on everybody else. So, that is an example of something where the code says it's okay because our code hasn't really caught up to where we've really shifted as a community. And that's why, I'm so much, even though it's going to be more work than I'm mentally prepared to do at this very moment, the general plan update, which is going to be a, 5-year process, that's where we can look at really, kind of bringing a lot of these things forward to reflect, just kind of the reality of where we're at now.
What was the last general plan completed? That was.
The last big one was 2008.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I have a question.
Okay. Yeah.
You're considering these things individually, but there's a congregate effect. And what I'm thinking of in particular is environmental impact. So I notice frequently that riparian corridors are compromised. That where there's a riparian corridor, there's allowed to be an encroachment. Maybe it's a minor encroachment or a major one. But these things add up, right? And, like an endangered species, eventually there'll be nothing left to protect. So I'm wondering if you think about things in congregate like that, if you think about the overall impact. Because I see this just all the time.
I'd say we definitely do. And, the riparian corridor is an example where, while there is a lot of encroachment into the riparian corridors, most of it is from before 2014 where we passed the riparian corridor ordinance. So a lot of it is just, it's been there forever and we just, have to kind of grit our teeth and sneer at it as we go by. But we really do look at, I'd say less so for riparian corridors. It's more so for things like ag processing and, events at, large facilities, things like that, where we can more easily, conduct like an actual analysis and include it in our environmental review of like, okay, we know that there's 500 existing trips here and this new project is adding 1,000. So now we're dealing with the compound impacts of 1,500. That being said, it is extremely challenging and I know that we don't always get the cumulative impact assessment at the level that the
You notice
commission
you
would
looking
like.
at me.
Yeah.
I raise that issue regularly.
Right.
And it's, Scott's example is perfect, because it's really obvious if it's generating 1,000 new trips or something. The more complicated and challenging issue is with not one that generates 1,000, but 200 that generate 5. It's
Mhm.
especially, roads out here, traffic, and for people who've been here a long time, I think we've all noticed not just an increase in traffic, but a decrease in quality of driving. That's as nice as I can say it.
Control over that. You think you like it against on Kessler Highway, let me tell you.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I can think of Board of Zoning adjustment hearings, it was a winery on West Side Road, and it was I think it might have been Commissioner Fogg at the time saying, I'm gonna approve this one, but God help the next guy. Because it was at that point of, I don't know if we're just at the threshold, but it gets a whole lot harder after this one. So I don't think there's ever gonna be kind of a perfect calculus for it. But I think one thing that I think we can all have experience in life is nothing gets easier. And that's especially true in land use. The easy things, for the most part, have been built and done already. And it's the hard stuff that's left over.
well, and Scott refers to 2017 with fires, which obviously profound change in people's relationship with life in Sonoma County. And one of the things that was really never even discussed, or if it was really in the abstract, about evacuation. Now, that's front and center on everything. So it's the staff and the board, Board of Soups, need to recognize that now we have to deal with this. This has to be factored in. And it was a big part of the discussion about the hotel that appropriately so.
I have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
I've heard from a number of people, a lot of frustration about, conditions for approval and whether or not anybody really follows up and actually requires them to be implemented. And I don't mean this pejoratively at all. This is just what's coming into me, and I'm just curious, if there is any further involvement of the public after there's been permanent approval, but with a lot of conditions for approval, about who's monitoring and who's saying, yep, you've met your condition or not.
Yeah, so short answer is yes, so much yes. If we didn't do that, I think we'd probably do everything else twice as fast. It takes up a huge amount of time. So the planner who's been working on a project, they've done the analysis, they've gone to a public hearing. The commissioners have voted to approve it, or even the board of supervisors have voted to approve it. It seems like it's the end, and for a lot of people, it is kind of their end of their involvement in the process, but the planner who's been working on it, there's a whole lot more left to do. Some projects can take, 2 to 4 years to really get to the point where they can start operating. Think how long it takes to build, even a single family dwelling, then, it only gets bigger and crazier. So all through that process, the conditions of approval have, kind of additional kind of time checks in. These need to be done prior to the issuance of a building permit. These need to be done prior to you know, opening for business. And these things you have to keep doing forever, or we're gonna take your permit away. So there's a whole bunch of things in there. So if we have, people who participated in the public process and, let's say there's a condition that the commissioners have added saying, you know, we've heard from the community that they're really concerned about this one thing, so we're adding this one new condition. And you know, sometimes they'll even put like a phone number in there, like a 24-hour contact or something like that. So that condition, you know, it's useful if you've participated in the whole process because you remember that it's there. And so if there are issues, you know, you'll be hopefully the first to let us know about it. You know, one challenge of county planning more so than city planning is the county is really big. You know, if we were Cotati, you know, we could all just walk from one side of the town to the other. Pretty easy to see what's going on. But if we're looking at, you know, doing, you know, code compliance out in Annapolis or the Sea Ranch or down at Sonoma Raceway, there's just a huge range. That's why we really, even though it's not ideal, we do operate code enforcement under a complaint basis. Just because that's the only way to kind of efficiently do it without having a, you know, $10 million code enforcement department. So let's say someone is not doing what they said they would do as part of the condition of approval. So that's kind of its own process, and I won't belabor the point in this meeting because I think we should also talk about policy items. But let's say they said, you know, and I realize that this is a mundane example, but just to illustrate the point, they said, you know, I'm gonna put out, you know, all the garbage bins for everyone on the street every Monday as part of my conditions of approval. Again, I know that's pretty mundane. And if they don't do that, they risk losing that thing that they potentially spent years trying to get approved. So first we try to get them to correct the behavior. You know, we say, hey, you haven't been doing this thing you said you'd do, you need to fix it. So let's say they get better at it for a little while, and then again, we start getting complaints. At that point, staff has a decision of, you know, is this egregious enough? Has this been going on long enough where they've had a chance to fix it? We have it in writing multiple times, and they're still not doing it. Then we go through a process to revoke the use permit, which brings it back to the commission. And it's, you know, based on, you know, findings of fact. It's, you know, because we're taking someone's rights away. So it's not, we can't just say, well, you haven't done it, so your permit's gone. Sorry, you know, they have a chance to, you know, kind of make their case. And that process can take a really long time. You know, that's why we just, in the last year, changed how we permit vacation rentals, because they had to go through that same process where it's like, okay, well, I guess we're gonna spend the next year and a half working on trying to, you know, revoke this vacation rental permit. And a lot of the times they just did just enough to where, you know, we couldn't make the findings. So that's an example of where, you know, our code wasn't suiting our needs at the time. So we've, you know, shifted to this license approach where, you know, they've got a land use permit that says, okay, they're allowed to do this as long as they get a license. And the license is a different thing where if you have any violations, we can suspend it right away. We're not saying you can't do it if you're in full compliance, but you're not in full compliance. So it's a faster enforcement speed. So
When did you say that changed?
about a year ago. So we're gonna be going back to the Board of Supervisors April 30th, definitely in April, I think April 30th, to give a year, an update of, okay, it's been in effect for a year. This is where we're at in terms of the number of people who've converted over to the new program, the number that are still outstanding. This is how it's working. Maybe we might recommend some changes in terms of enforcement, things like that. You know, kind of a more of an informational update. You know, anyone that's been following the vacation rental process, you know, we're up to like phase 9 of, you know, the original ordinance, because You know, like so many other things, it's incremental. It's never gonna be
A
perfect.
living document.
Yes.
How long
Yes.
did you give them to get a license?
I think we gave them a year, about a year.
Correct.
Thank you.
So Patty, on that, just to footnote. However elaborate the conditions are, or however many there are. Scott points out that a bunch of them are really simple to monitor. You have to widen the road 8 feet for 300 yards, yes or no, check. You have to pay into the Affordable Housing Mitigation Fund. Checks written, we received it, check. Then there's the, just the open-ended operational performance category, hours of operation. You know, lights off by 10 o'clock, no amplified sound, or no amplified sound except within these hours, up to this limit, that kind of stuff. That's the stuff. And because use permits run with the land, you know, you might have a really responsible initial owner that got the permit. And then they, you know, sell it, and then they sell it to somebody else. And then, you know, maybe that the current owner isn't even aware of the conditions. So, you know, in those instances, you have to have somebody in the community get all the code enforcement. And like you said, they don't go out there with a hammer and, you know, put it closed on the thing. It's like the first thing you get a letter that says, yeah, you know, you're not performing under condition 37 or something. You have to close at 9 o'clock, not 11 o'clock. Okay, fine. We didn't know that. We're good. But it's very rare that anything gets brought forward to revoke a permit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a great point about, you know, the individual. You know, so much, you know, we do hear comments of like, oh, this is, you know, he's an upstanding citizen and a real cool dude. It's like, okay, but ultimately, that upstanding citizen can sell his property to someone else. And, you know, the next person may not be. So that's why we really don't we don't factor the personality of the applicant in our land use decisions, because we have to assume that this permit will exist forever.
So we know one thing for sure, whoever got the permit is not gonna still be alive 100 years from now, or 50 years, well, maybe 50 years from now, certainly not 100. Yeah, so you have to write that, and it's difficult to do because you have some nice person with all their friends and neighbors and supporters in the audience holding forth on, you should let them do this because they're really great and they'll be good neighbors. But then you know they're not going to be the neighbor forever. So you have to kind of write it to prevent somebody who's not a good neighbor from just spoiling the neighborhood.
Right, and also from just an equity standpoint, you know, the public service, that's all the public. You know, it's not just a certain kind of public. And so even the most difficult, challenging person to work with for staff, we're still trying to get them to be able to potentially do something that, you know, our regulations, our rules say that they can do. So
Sometimes despite themselves.
yes. So, you know, that's just another thing to think about, you know, from that perspective of, you know, wearing, you know, my, you know, government employee hat, you know, I'm trying to, you know, kind of help someone through this process, and it's not about the person, it's about, you know, what they're asking you to do.
Scott, I'd like to stop for a moment and inquire if there's any public comments so far. It's been a lot of information. You may have questions, so.
Well, I do have a question, and it does kind of go along with the sort of open-ended conditions and how difficult that can be
Mhm.
to deal with. And I'm thinking, and my memory could be wrong on this, but it seemed to me that when the hotel came around, there was some part of it that said, that people going to events and whatnot at the hotel could not, park all over the neighborhoods. And essentially, you know, take up all parking spots, but, and I thought to myself, how would you ever you know, what would you do about that? You
I-
know?
I'd say that shows you're thinking about a real issue, because I think about that during every single conditional approval. How are we gonna enforce this? If it's a conditional approval you can't enforce, then it may as well not exist. And, you know, I learned this back when I started at the county back in 2016. I started getting these envelopes in the mail filled with, each of them had 180 pink slips with 2 lines that said took water. And that is something that I still get, although thankfully I now get an Excel spreadsheet a couple times a year, from a 1992 use permit approval of someone who is trucking water outside Rohnert Park. A condition of approval was written that every truck that fills up with water will sign a slip, and then twice a year, they will mail it to the person who's assigned that record from 1992. So before I even started, someone decided Scott is gonna have to be responsible for this. So I have manila folders stacked like this, full of it, that I keep just to use as a tool to talk to new planners of, when you're writing that condition of approval and you're committing to eternal enforcement, you know, you are gonna have a drawer full of these also. So it's exactly on point.
Nick,
A lot of the stuff you're talking about, it feels like the issues being raised have much to do with information transparency and clarity.
Mhm.
Most of what I was gonna ask is if there's some sort of like a technological solution towards creating more transparency for bodies like this. Sounds like you're already thinking about that and the optimization of that.
Mhm.
But is sort of like language clarity part of that as well? One of the things I've noticed is that if I ask Permit Sonoma office for an answer, they'll send me to a page I literally cannot read it. I'm not a smart person. And so are there other like solutions being thought of right now in terms of walking through the process you walked us through in a very clear, understandable way that you can direct people towards, so that when they do have questions, they can say, I can read and therefore I can understand the process?
Yeah, that's, short answer is yes, working on it. And it is a challenge of, you know, converting it from, you know, kind of technical jargon, you know, planner language, engineer language, building inspector language, into just, you know, easy to understand regular language. You know, we all have our specialty, we all have things that we are interested in, where, you know, we can probably speak in a way that most other people in this room just don't understand, just because we haven't had the ability, you know, to really dive into that.
AI does a tremendous job distilling that information. Jonas is using it on all of his reports now.
AI is a heck of a thing.
Right.
So I'm not gonna touch that one. So yes, we absolutely need to be doing better. And a lot of that is also, I think, a culture thing for the department, that we're really, you know, we're almost taking our foot off the gas on some aspects, so that we can really spend more time working on that accessibility, transparency issue of being able to like articulate what we're actually talking about. You know, me saying, oh, like we're gonna add a checkbox at the completeness review in the Excel permitting system at, you know, the 3rd step, doesn't mean anything to anyone. But, you know, me saying, you know, we're gonna change the status of a permit, plain language that anyone can understand, you know, the better paints a picture. I think that that's the direction that we need to be going towards. And it's really hard because so much of what we do is tied to people's livelihoods and, you know, ultimately what they're legally allowed to do or not. So sometimes we do need to use these kind of terms of art that legally means something different in a code of regulations than they do, you know, kind of just, you know, saying hi to someone on the street. So I really feel like we need to have, kind of multiple versions of a lot of things where it's like, this is kind of the snapshot. And if you want to dig down deeper, you can, but that's not the only way to get to something.
Yeah, I think it's the nested solution where it's like you start here and as you get increasingly
Right.
complex.
Yeah, it's like going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole.
Yes, it sounds like you have the answers to so many of the things, like hearing this discussion go back and forth. Stuff that the permit Sonoma office has not thought of as not being uncovered.
Mhm.
It's just things that the permit Sonoma office is not communicating.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and that's something that we will always be able to do better. Like if, I win the lotto and I go away and there's someone else new that comes in and is like, we are fully transparent and we're not doing anything to get better, they are wrong. It's just that, relentless incremental improvement.
there's communication strategists that can you can hire to help out with a lot of, I think. If we live in the Bay Area and. the tech world,
We
it's
have
not-
someone new starting on Tuesday, and one of their main tasks is going to be the website accessibility
Cool.
from
Awesome.
a readability standpoint and a whole bunch of other things.
Great, that's good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, we've done that, it's not a clean tower, and it's worked.
We have
Okay.
some online questions.
Well, very good.
We have two people. First, we have Vesta. Vesta, I am, unmute yourself and you should be able to comment now.
Okay, along the lines, can you hear me? Yes? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, cool. Along the lines of accessibility and transparency and language used, I love the fact that you're reviewing it because there is a lot of language that is used that people who are not cognizant of your skills and topics would have no idea what you're talking about. I love what you're doing tonight, and I'm wondering if this can be turned into text to explain your processes that people don't understand. When Forestville was having our town hall last time and we were talking about the housing element, I had created some documents, one complex and one simple, to explain what DEIR is and EIR is and what is the process of the housing element, how long does it take, etc. It was challenging for me because this is not my profession, but people seem to appreciate having something put into a language that they understand, complex projects defined in essence in an outline form. What you're saying right now, like you say, dig deep into Wikipedia, you start simple and work your way down into the details. You are explaining this to us tonight, and it's very understandable and very useful, and I'm taking notes, but I'm not the girl to write this. So I'm wondering if you're using AI, can you have that, the text, the audio version of this meeting turned into something that is defining what you are telling us and getting it posted on your website as you review your website to be more readable, etc. And can you have a glossary of terms that would define some of the things that people simply don't know? Would that be possible in your improvements of services and communication at Permit Sonoma? And hi, Eric, I adore seeing you. Sorry, I'm not in the room. I just couldn't make it in person.
So I can speak.
Yeah, go
I
ahead,
can answer.
Stab.
Vesta, this is Debbie. I will be taking the minutes from this meeting and making a detailed summary for you all to have.
I think she's asking for more of a, I mean, that's really helpful, but we need the flow chart. You know?
So, yes, will it be right after this meeting? No. But that is another thing that I'm really pushing on in my new role at Permit Sonoma is, kind of the accessible flowchart version of what we've talked about today. There are some, old flowcharts that are in like Word perfect document format that we can only open in on one computer in the entire building. So it has been done before, but they really need to be updated for where we're at now. And so not just for, members of the public who are interested, but what I'm, as part of our, kind of process improvements, I'm really looking at, each of the groups in Permit Sonoma to, kind of come up with, kind of a workflow of how they go through their process, whether it's a septic permit, a grading permit. We're mostly talking about planning permits today, but, generally, if there's a planning permit, then eventually there is gonna be a grading permit and a sewer permit and a building permit. And I think people are interested in that as well. And so not only should members of the public, be able to understand what something is easily that, their neighbor might be doing, I think you all should understand what it is that, members of, your government are, the process they're going through as part of that analysis. So instead of, all of you having to wonder, did they look at the water supply for this project? It's like, oh yeah, that's the third thing that they have to do on every permit. And that's not to say that, we won't still get questions and, part of the reason that we are humans and not AI, although it's getting blurred, is so that, we can answer these questions. And if we aren't able to effectively explain it, try to go a different route and explain it in another way. So Vesta, we are working on it. Not just in terms of, kind of the permit processes, but just in general, I want to do a better job of being able to communicate not only just what the department is doing, but kind of what's coming and what our ultimate goal is, even if we haven't accomplished it yet.
Oh, I turned off first.
You had another comment?
We had another Jackie. Let me see if I can bring Jackie in. Jackie, if you unmute yourself, yes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Jackie Brazil, and I'm working on a very large community project in Forestville. Our goal is building a skate park. I'm very enthusiastic, and I'm probably getting way ahead of myself, but I'm wondering if the process would be to start with Permit Sonoma with our list of what we're supposed to do, and then you guys send it to the MAC, or does it make sense for me to involve the MAC planning committee with our project? I'm just a little confused about that. Thank you.
My recommendation would be both. I think I've been meeting with folks about the skate park since 2018. So I know that it's been, a long time dream, but so maybe not just specifically about the skate park, but let's say it's any kind of thing that the community is interested in. I think, and again, the MAC doesn't belong to me. This is just what I would like to see is, I think that there is value in talking about something with the community that it affects, especially if it's, kind of a community-driven process, because nobody needs to be an expert in everything if you're all, having a community meeting, because everybody brings their piece. And then I think it creates a more, like, a better product for when it does come time for the formal submittal to Permit Sonoma. And that's when we can talk about, okay, what you have is great. Did you consider, ADA compliance for access? Where's the water coming from? Where's the water going out? Things like that. Because our goal is to get everyone through the process as quickly as we can be assured that is a positive and safe product. It's not doing anyone any good if we, get every permit through in a day and it's just total bedlam, nothing's safe, nothing's meeting building code, who knows what happens in an earthquake. So, we try to move things as fast as we can to make sure everything is met. And things like parks, for example, are like, they seem like something that should be so easy. And if it was easy, they wouldn't have made a TV show about it. But, you know, that's generally people are really positive about something like a park, you know, it's a community benefit. But that doesn't mean there isn't a whole lot of complexity that goes into it, ranging from, you know, a lot of the best places for parks are like Caltrans area where it's not even, you know, fully a local decision. So everything gets complicated, but we're here to talk to you. And again, there's not many projects that I remember talking about longer than the skate park so far.
Right. Any further questions from,
Can I briefly maybe talk about policy, and then maybe there might be some more questions there?
briefly, because we have some other agenda items.
Okay, so super briefly, so larger scale projects that are not a permit, it's things like the housing element update or the general plan or the winery events or tree ordinance. Those are things where, you know, staff really looks to the max to help serve as a conduit to reach people that maybe, you know, aren't the types that are gonna be going on our website, but they are the type that, you know, care about issues in their community. So those are instances where we would really want, you know, staff to have an interface, you know, in a forum like this. You know, early on in the process, partway through the process, and at the end of the process. So, I just open, you know, much like I'm here today, you know, and I thank you for that. You know, we would want to come back again in the future. So I'll leave it at that since I know you have other business.
Thank you very much. Any questions on the policy side? Committee members? From the public? From online?
There are no hands. Does anybody online have any further questions on the policy side?
Very good. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming out and spending time with us this evening and sharing this information, because it's a complicated subject and you guys are experts in, you know, the community is right. But Vesta, is there a way to distill some of this complicated language into plain English, if you will? And I understand that the challenges that encompasses, but it's not insurmountable. And hopefully in the next year or so, we can get that accomplished.
Get closer to accomplishing it,
Good.
because there's always more.
Well, first off, you know, the glossary of terms is really helpful. And if you look at Sonoma Clean Power's monthly meetings, there's a glossary of terms on every agenda and every board packet and every CAC packet. So it's really helpful.
Take a look.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Always remember
What's the
that
comments from
the
Commissioner
quote,
Quote?
the quote attributed to former President Clinton: "Every complex problem has a simple solution that's wrong."
Yeah.
The stuff, you know, part of it is just unavoidably, you can't simplify getting into the details unless you quit getting into the detail.
Exactly.
Well, getting noticed to us on
That's
the projects.
That's the
Great first.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you've got Debbie's email address. You're gonna forward that information either to her or to an email address that will forward to her, and that's easy to set up with ISD and be really helpful.
yep, and we won't even need ISD, we'll just go in and change it.
Do it yourselves.
We'll do it ourselves.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
Great,
go vigilante.
good. And then Debbie will be in touch with whomever is the chair of land use
Which will
on a
be discussing.
weekly basis or as appropriate. Good. Thank you.
Or every member.
You bet.
Without further comment, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item.
Once, and then
Good to meet you.
So,
I was thinking for your. Seriously.
You had a good long run of luck.
yeah, The next item on our agenda is item number 4, which is discussion on 2024 committee reorganization. And this discussion is regarding the membership and leadership. Action will be taken at a regular meeting at the Russian River MAC representatives and community personnel interested in participating in the land use committee should attend this meeting. So basically what we need to do is reorganize our committee. And this is an opportunity to have new members apply for positions on the committee. And a commissioner, or not commissioner, but committee member Hernandez is stepping down as a community member, so we're gonna have a vacancy for a community member. And I'm not sure about Lisa's she's a,
Lisa is going to be living in Australia for the foreseeable future, so I think she is not going
But
to.
shall remain as an alternate.
Yeah, she'll remain as an alternate. She
Yeah.
can attend twice with the AB 24. But in terms of being on the land use committee, I think she is not interested.
Right.
in it. She's on
so
a couple other committees.
we're gonna have vacancies there. And in the spirit of succession, I feel it's really important that the chair rotates on an annual basis. I don't feel it's appropriate to have the chair for several years. I think it's an opportunity for other people to participate. And that being said, I would like to step down from chair position because I'm assuming the position of vice chair on the full MAC. So I would be stepping down, maybe stepping off the committee if there are people that are interested in joining the committee. So we're opening it up for discussion.
Have you reached out to other MAC members to see who's interested?
We have.
in joining?
There
This is
were a
joint
couple
meeting.
yeah, and didn't you have some interest? I thought we might have had some Forestville reps here that were interested in joining,
I thought that they were, but they're not.
but they're
here.
not here. But no formation will take place at this meeting. It has to take place at the next week at the MAC meeting. It will be on the agenda. So this is an opportunity for discussion about it. Anybody could have been here, but a final decision doesn't have to be made about any of this. But I think Mike would rest easy knowing if maybe one of you were interested
Right.
in assuming the chair role, because anybody else who would come on would be new to the committee.
I have a process question about membership. As I recall, when I came on, you chose who would be members. Is that Right, so the chair chooses.
Yeah,
Is
the
that
chair
right?
did that. Now
Council has clarified that it's the
they want.
chair of the MAC
Right.
who
Oh, I
forms the
see.
committee. So it was a process thing last year and
Okay.
that's how.
It's
we're doing it.
changed.
It's changed.
Kind of like permits and all. It's a public.
Mike, do you plan to stay on the committee?
You know, I'm going to be vice chair of the full MAC, so I could, but I would prefer to step down if possible.
No, I understand
Yeah.
that part, but, you know, in my mind, I'm still very new to this. I've been on this committee for a year and we met twice in that year.
Right.
And while I do understand your desire to rotate off, but also to have people rotate off every year, I think I would not be interested at all to leave this committee if you weren't going to stay on it and be a resource. That's just my feeling. Joe?
Right.
I just got appointed to Board of Trustees. That's gonna require a lot of my attention, and I'm on 3 other boards as well. So I cannot take on the leadership role.
All right, so what we're gonna have to do is reach out next week at the full MAC meeting.
But I'm hearing Patty say that you would consider taking the chair role of the committee if Mike were still a member of the committee.
Yes.
Okay,
So keep that in mind. And
So
that
we're
can
gonna
all
have
be
so
brought back to the
eight-
group.
And you would be stepping off of this committee, is that what
I'll
you
stay
said?
on the committee.
You'll stay on there?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So if we, can we continue as a committee if we only have 3 members?
No, we could, but it makes a quorum extremely difficult. If one of us is absent.
Okay.
So,
And I think that there is interest, and I think there is interest from one of the Forestville reps to join the committee. I don't know why
Either of the
they're
two.
not here.
yeah.
And as a
public-
community member.
Public is very interested, yes.
Wonderful.
So Nick has expressed interest, he's here at the meeting and has provided good input, so. Any further discussion on this agenda item? So Nick, we're not in a position to make the appointment, has to be made next week at the full MAC meeting, but
Since
I really appreciate your attendance this evening.
Yes, thank you so
Your
much.
interest stepping up, because it's difficult, all of our river communities, to get people involved, it's sometimes challenging. And I really appreciate your interest, so thank you.
Yeah, it was a rainy night. This was very valuable conversation. Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may. This is an open agenda, and I'm asking for public comment.
Amazing. So obviously, I can intuit what the purpose of this particular committee is, but do you guys have a relatively clear definition of what this body's role is in the community? Again, I can make a hunch about what that is, but I'd be curious to hear from your guys' perspective, because that also might help me better understand who I know that could be particularly interested in this work.
So we do have bylaws.
Is there a charter?
I don't think there's bylaws for the standing committee. For the full map, there is.
I thought that we had established some bylaws for land use when we formed the committee.
I will look for them
Thank you.
and I will send them to you. I will send them to all of you if I find them.
Rather than just listening, obviously, like listening and transferring information is important, but deciding what sort of manner in which to enact the feedback you get from the community, I think would be helpful for me to understand.
I'll look for them.
So this goes back to when when we formed the committee, there's a definition of what we're going to do. And that was by motion by the full MAC. In order to form the committee.
So it'll be in
It's back
minutes.
there, yeah.
I'll find it.
But to answer part of your question, we report to the MAC. So we bring our findings and our points of view to the MAC. And the MAC expresses them in the appropriate way through Linda, the board. That be accurate.
So the one meeting we had last March, I did a written report, and it was quite lengthy. We had an hour and a half, an hour and 3/4 meeting on one subject. And so you can see basically what was discussed. It's on the website, so.
Yeah, and I think of this committee as providing additional opportunities for people who will be impacted by any of the projects that are proposed for our area. Positive or negative, it's not like we have any authority to approve a permit or not.
Right.
But we're another forum for people who are impacted or believe they will be impacted to raise things as early as possible so that whether it's at the EIR stage or later, that issues get spotted as early as possible so that they can, if possible, get resolved. And that's why this meeting has focused so heavily on our need from the agency to get us a lot earlier input about what's coming along so that when we hold meetings, we can address, and get the public online or here in person and say, what do you think? How does this impact you and what conditions would you like to see or things like that? And so we're not, the only opportunity, obviously, for the public to get involved, but I think it's one of the goals of the committee is to have another layer as early as possible for public participation.
I've also used the other committee that I'm part of, the communications at a time, to bring projects, well, we only really had one project, one major project, through to the communications committee to find ways to get it more broadly recognized that it exists, what's going on, when it's going to happen, how they connect.
And you made mention of the fact that there's not that many meetings in the past year. Does this committee meet with regularity, or is it primarily ad hoc?
In
That's our
general,
next item of agenda.
That is the next item.
so, any public comment online,
If
this
you
item?
have public comment on the 2024 committee organization, please raise your hand. I do not see anyone. Oh, we have Vicky Clues.
Great.
Where you been?
She's been quiet. Oh, there she goes. Vicky, you unmute yourself? Yes.
I was muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks you guys. So I'm sorry I missed the first half of the meeting, but I just want to stress to this committee, I think, is so important for us. And thank you guys for everything you do. But I just want to stress that I think we need to get reach out to some of the reps who have some environmental work under their belt and kind of get that as part of this committee. And, hopefully have that perspective reflected in some of the things that we do. That's all.
Very good. Well taken. Thank you. Any further comment online?
There are no further hands raised.
Very good. So I think we can close this agenda item, move on to our meeting calendar, agenda item number 5. And we'll discuss a prospective standing calendar for 2024 land use committee meetings. Taking into consideration the permits and all notification timeline, as well as the timeline needed for this committee's need to report to the MAC within public feedback periods. It is recommended that the committee continue to meet on the first Thursday of even numbered months, February 1st, April 4th, June 6th, August 1st, October 3rd, and December 5th. Additionally, the land use committee may hold special meetings at the discretion of the chair. Opening this up for conversation with committee members.
What does it take to convene a meeting that is not on the regular?
Special meeting, according to the Brown, we are a Brown Act committee. And to comply with Brown Act, we can call a meeting in 24 hours.
Okay.
For
Because
special meetings.
I think that every other month you operated that way for a while and it seems to have worked. But, as we've heard here today, there is this problem of notification.
Correct.
So long as there is a fairly flexible ability to convene an additional meeting if we need it, that I would support the calendar that you have proposed.
And that makes sense because if you look at the BZA, Board of Zoning Adjustments and so forth, their county notifications, most of their meetings are canceled and then they pull a special meeting. So this makes complete sense to have to establish it, in my mind, to establish a calendar. And then at the board chair's discretion, call a special meeting as necessary.
Yes.
Further comment from committee members?
I approve of the suggested schedule.
Pardon me?
I approve of the suggested schedule.
Well, we're not ready to approve it until we have public comment.
Until
And again, that is also an item that'll be for approval on
Right.
next week's MAC
Right.
meeting, but it's a good.
Public comment on this item? Is there public comment online?
I do have.
Oops, sorry, I see your hand there.
That's all right. Obviously not knowing enough about this and the labor that goes into preparing these meetings, my only comment I guess would be, I think one of the reasons that participation tends to suffer sometimes is a lack of understanding when things are, and meeting regularly month by month can oftentimes increase just like the awareness of this happens at the same time every month as opposed to bi-monthly meetings, which can get lost in people's mental space. So my only thing would be if bi-monthly is the right amount of time, if there's just ways that we can consider increasing the memorability of those meetings to boost attendance.
I have a comment about that. I get that, and I really agree with the MAC meetings, where there's no shortage of topics. But there can be a shortage of topics, as Mike was saying about the Bureau of Zoning Adjustments. They cancel a third to 2/3 of their meetings. And if we were to do that because we didn't have anything in front of us, that would take that whole reliability away. So I think based on from what I've seen, based on the volume of work that comes our way, bi-monthly is probably right.
But we certainly should make sure that always Supervisor Hopkins' newsletter will highlight the meetings coming up, you know, so hopefully at least the people who look at that, which I do religiously, will get reminded, this is what's coming up, the month that this committee will be meeting.
There was a young woman at the governance, you might have noticed, who said, hey, Forestville plasters every telephone call with notices about their meetings. And she said, I volunteer to do that. Well, we just invited her on the communications committee. So she's gonna do that, and we need to get word out better. I mean, not everybody's on Facebook, not everybody looks at the same social media, so we need to find new ways to convey that information.
And to let them know what is the big item that's coming up, because when people know it's the Lock Hotel or it's the asphalt plant or something like that, they do show up.
Yeah.
I would like to talk to you about this after the meeting, if it's for communications related, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah,
And we have we have Vicky with her hand up again. And I'll just chime in that one of the features of the new District 5 Guerneville satellite office is a copy machine. Exactly for that reason, to be able to get out here and quickly print flyers and have them
Awesome.
available.
We completed with public comment.
Jim.
It's okay, now we do the public comment online.
Thank you. And Vicky, I think you can speak now.
Hi, can I just give a shout out to Vesta, because the woman that Joe is talking about actually directly referenced the neon signs that Vesta and Lucy and I posted all over the place. But I just want to clarify, Mike, that if you have a schedule every other month, but there's nothing to discuss, then it's okay to cancel a meeting. Am I understanding that? Because you had a schedule last year and you had one meeting. So how does that work?
Well, the way it worked last year is that many times we did not receive advance notification from Permit Sonoma to allow us to discuss an item, and solicit public input, and then bring it to the MAC for a recommendation. The timeline was cut too short, and we were cut off at the knees, unfortunately.
Well, so this isn't a criticism of you. I'm just saying, once you set a schedule, procedurally, you're allowed to cancel if you don't have a discussion that is relevant. Okay. Understood.
Okay. Does that conclude the public comment from the?
Yes. Oh, now we have Vesta.
Okay, Vesta.
Please unmute.
Vicky's comment about basically put it on the schedule, have it up on the website, and if you don't have a topic, cancel it rather than trying to announce a meeting in time for it to be relevant. I think that's a real valid comment. Thank you, Vicky, because this is extremely important, what goes on in our communities. The Land Use Committee is probably one of the most important committees we have. So thank you.
Thank you.
That completes our agenda items for this evening. We've had public comment. We appreciate the public comment. We appreciate the public being here. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy days to spend time in this kind of empty room. So
Cold and pleasant.
yes. So with that, I'd call for a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Moved and seconded. We adjourn the meeting at 7:46 PM. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.